My ex used me for stability while seeing someone else, so I planned my exit carefully and never looked back even when she begged later. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for a long time I honestly believed that being stable, calm, and dependable was the same thing as being loved. I grew up thinking love wasn't loud or dramatic, it was showing up, paying bills on time, keeping promises, and being the person others could lean on. When I met my ex, I was in a quiet phase of life, tired of chaos, craving something steady. I wanted routines, shared dinners, and a future that didn't feel like a constant emergency. She came into my life looking exhausted by the world. She told me she'd been through too much, that people always left her, that she just wanted peace. I remember her saying, "You make me feel safe. Like I can finally breathe." That sentence stuck to me. I wore it like a badge. She seemed grateful, soft-spoken, almost fragile in a way that made me want to protect her. Slowly, without any big conversation, I became the anchor. I paid more of the rent. I covered groceries when she was short this month. I handled planning, budgeting, reminders, and emotional cleanup after her bad days. She'd sigh and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and I'd feel useful, needed, important. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. There were small signs early on, moments where the balance felt off. She'd promised to contribute next month. She'd shut down when I brought up money. Some nights she felt distant, scrolling on her phone, barely present. But whenever I hesitated or questioned things, she'd look hurt and say, "I'm just overwhelmed." You know that. And I believed her. I kept telling myself this was temporary stress. That once things settled, she'd meet me halfway. That patience was love. That consistency would earn commitment. I truly believed if I stayed steady long enough, she'd choose me fully. I didn't realize yet that I was confusing loyalty with self-erasure, or that my need to be dependable was quietly teaching her how much she could take. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and looking back now, part 2 was where the imbalance stopped being subtle and started becoming my normal. At the time, I didn't call it that. I just thought relationships went through uneven seasons. She was still sweet, still affectionate when she wanted to be, but the weight on my shoulders kept getting heavier in ways I couldn't quite explain. She started leaning on me for everything, not just money, but reassurance, decisions, emotional regulation. If she had a bad day, it was my job to fix it. If she felt anxious, I had to calm her down. If she was short on rent, groceries, or bills, she'd sigh and say, "I hate asking, but you're the only one I can trust." Hearing that made me feel chosen, even as my bank account quietly shrank. Whenever I tried to bring up balance, she'd look wounded. "Why are you keeping score?" she'd ask softly. Or worse, she'd say, "I thought you cared about me more than money." Those words hit hard. I'd immediately backtrack, apologize, and reassure her I wasn't going anywhere. Somehow, I always ended up feeling guilty for even noticing the imbalance. There were moments that felt off. She guarded her phone more. She'd step into another room to text. If I asked who she was talking to, she'd laugh and say, "You're overthinking again." Sometimes she'd disappear for hours with vague explanations like, "I just needed space." I told myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to become the controlling guy. Friends hinted I was doing too much. One even said, "Man, it sounds like you're carrying that whole relationship." I defended her instantly. I said she was just overwhelmed, that she'd had a hard past, that she needed stability. Saying it out loud almost convinced me. Inside, though, I was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. I felt responsible for keeping everything together, terrified that if I stopped holding things up, the whole relationship would collapse. And somewhere deep down, a quiet fear started forming that I wasn't being loved for who I was, but for what I provided. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and by the time part 3 begins, the small doubts I kept pushing down started stacking up into something heavier. At first, it was little inconsistencies I couldn't quite explain. Stories that changed slightly. Timelines that didn't line up. Casual comments that didn't match what she'd said the week before. Nothing dramatic enough to accuse her of lying, just enough to make my stomach tighten. When I asked gentle questions, she'd sigh and say, "Why are you interrogating me?" Her tone always made me feel like I'd crossed a line. Sometimes she'd laugh it off and say, "You think too much," like my concern was a personality flaw. Other times, she'd turn quiet and distant, forcing me to chase reassurance instead of answers. I learned quickly that curiosity came with consequences. Emotionally, the rules kept shifting. Some days she was warm, affectionate, leaning into me on the couch and whispering how lucky she was. Other days she felt miles away, glued to her phone, replying in short sentences. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd say, "I'm just tired," or "Can you not make everything a big deal?" So I stopped asking. I started swallowing questions before they reached my mouth. The financial pressure didn't ease either. There was always another reason she couldn't contribute: a delayed paycheck, unexpected expense, bad month. When I hesitated once, she looked hurt and said, "I thought you understood what I'm dealing with." That sentence worked every time. I'd feel selfish, cold, unloving. I'd pay, and then apologize for even hesitating. Inside, though, something was changing. I was constantly anxious, replaying conversations in my head, wondering what version of her I'd get each day. I started feeling like I had to earn affection by staying useful. The more I gave, the more distant she became. At night, lying next to her while she scrolled silently on her phone, I'd stare at the ceiling and feel this quiet dread settle in. I couldn't name it yet, but I felt it growing, the sense that I was slowly disappearing inside a relationship that was supposed to make me feel chosen. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 4 is where the first real crack appeared, the kind you can't unsee once it forms. It started with something small but sharp, the kind of moment that sticks in your chest. One night, her phone lit up on the table while she was in the shower. A name popped up I didn't recognize, followed by a message that felt too familiar. Not explicit. Just close. Too close. When I asked her about it later, casually, trying not to sound accusatory, her entire energy shifted. Her shoulders stiffened. Her voice went cold. "Why are you looking at my phone?" she snapped. I tried to explain I wasn't snooping, that it just lit up, but she cut me off. "You're being controlling," she said. "I can't believe you don't trust me." The words hit harder than I expected. Suddenly, I was the problem. She started crying, saying she felt trapped, judged, watched. I remember sitting there apologizing while my chest felt tight, even though I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. She said, "I thought you were different," and that sentence alone was enough to make me fold. I promised I'd do better. I promised I'd stop questioning things. I promised I trusted her. After that, the emotional terrain shifted. Any concern I raised became proof of my insecurity. Any boundary became pressure. If I looked confused or hurt, she'd say I was exhausting. Slowly, I learned that peace only existed if I stayed quiet. At the same time, she leaned on me more than ever. More bills. More emotional unloading. More late-night reassurance. She'd cry about feeling misunderstood, about how everyone always left her. I'd hold her and think, I won't be like them. But something inside me was fraying. I started feeling like I was being managed instead of loved. Like every conversation had invisible rules I didn't understand. Like my role wasn't to be a partner, but a stabilizer, someone who absorbed pressure so she didn't have to. And even then, part of me still believed this was just a rough phase. That if I stayed patient, stayed gentle, stayed dependable, it would pass. I didn't realize yet that this was the moment the balance fully tipped and that I was already losing myself trying to keep her calm. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and by part 5, suspicion had stopped being a passing thought and started living quietly in the background of everything I did. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was more like a constant hum I couldn't shut off. I'd wake up with it. I'd feel it while driving to work. It sat with me even during the moments when she was laughing beside me. Her behavior became more guarded. She kept her phone angled away, always face down, always within reach. If a notification buzzed, she'd check it instantly, sometimes stepping into another room. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Why do you always assume the worst?" That question made me feel ashamed, like suspicion itself was a flaw in my character. She started using language that made me doubt my own perception. "You're overthinking again. You always do this. You're making problems where there aren't any." After hearing it enough, I started believing her. I told myself I was insecure. That I was projecting. That I should be grateful she even tolerated my questions. So I swallowed the discomfort and tried to be easier to love. Financially, the pressure kept growing. There was always a reason she couldn't contribute: a delayed paycheck, an emergency, a bad week. When I hesitated once, she went quiet and distant, then said softly, "I just thought you cared about me more than this." That sentence hit harder than any argument. I paid, again, and hated myself for feeling resentful. At night, she'd lie beside me scrolling, barely speaking. The room felt cold even when she was inches away. I'd stare at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of her phone, wondering who was on the other side of it. My chest would tighten, but I'd tell myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy. The hardest part was how lonely it felt to doubt someone you're still trying to protect. I was exhausted, anxious, and constantly second-guessing my instincts. Still, I clung to the idea that this was just a phase, that if I stayed patient, supportive, and steady, things would finally even out. I didn't realize yet that I was training myself to ignore my own alarm bells, right before they were about to start screaming. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 6 is where everything quietly shattered, not with a fight, not with a confession, but with a moment I wasn't supposed to see. It happened on an ordinary night, the kind where nothing feels important until it suddenly is. She had stepped into the shower, and her phone buzzed on the table again. I wasn't trying to snoop. I swear I wasn't. But the screen lit up, and this time, the message preview stayed there long enough for me to read it. It wasn't explicit. That's what made it worse. It was familiar. Intimate in a casual way. Something like, "Miss you already. Today was nice." My stomach dropped. No emojis. No flirting. Just comfort. Familiarity. The kind that doesn't come from coworkers or just friends. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it through the bathroom door. My first instinct was to make excuses for her. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I misunderstood. But once the door in my head cracked open, everything rushed in. The late nights. The sudden errands. The emotional distance. The way she'd pull away from me but light up at her phone. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Something in me shut down instead. I started watching quietly. Listening more. Talking less. And the more I paid attention, the clearer the pattern became. She'd mention the same name casually, always in passing. She'd dress differently on certain days. Her mood would lift before going out, then crash when she came back. I replayed months of moments in my head, and they rearranged themselves into something ugly and undeniable. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't insecure. I wasn't imagining things. I was being lied to carefully, consistently, and calmly. What hurt most wasn't even the possibility of someone else. It was realizing how easily she'd let me carry the weight of her life while giving that version of herself to someone else. I felt stupid. Used. Small. That night, lying next to her while she slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me go numb. The trust I'd been protecting so fiercely finally cracked. And instead of confronting her, I made a quiet decision, one that would change how I played this entirely. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 7 is where I stopped reacting and started watching. After that night, something in me went quiet, not calm, not healed, just numb in a focused way. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her. I acted the same on the surface, but inside I pulled back like a tide preparing to disappear. I started paying attention to patterns instead of excuses. The way she'd suddenly become affectionate right after asking for money. The way her mood depended on whether I was being useful. The way she'd disappear for hours and return unusually light, almost energized. I stopped asking questions, and she didn't notice, which hurt more than if she had. She kept leaning on me. Can you cover this just for now? You're the only one I can rely on. I don't know what I'd do without you. Each sentence used to make me feel needed. Now they sounded transactional. Like reminders of my role. I began quietly protecting myself. I moved money into a separate account she didn't know about. I stopped offering to pay for extras. I started saying I'll see instead of course. Small changes, subtle enough not to trigger suspicion. She barely noticed, or maybe she didn't care, as long as the baseline support stayed. Emotionally, I pulled back too. I stopped over-explaining. Stopped chasing reassurance. When she vented, I listened but didn't rush to fix things. When she withdrew, I let her. It felt unnatural at first, like I was breaking a rule I'd lived by for years. She sensed the shift eventually. One night she asked, half joking, "Why are you so quiet lately?" I shrugged and said I was tired. She accepted it too easily. That stung. Part of me wanted her to fight for me the way I'd fought for her. Instead, she seemed more focused on her phone, her plans, her space. And that made something painfully clear: I was valuable for what I provided, not for who I was. I started imagining life without constantly managing someone else's emotions. The idea scared me, but it also felt like air entering a room that had been sealed too long. I wasn't ready to leave yet, but I was preparing myself to stop bleeding quietly. I didn't know it then, but this was the calm before the collapse, the moment right before I'd finally see just how replaceable I was to her. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 8 is where I finally hit rock bottom, not with a scream, but with a moment so quiet it hollowed me out. It happened on a night I'll probably never forget, because it confirmed everything I'd been trying not to believe. She said she was too tired to talk, that she needed space, that she just wanted to be alone. I nodded, played understanding, and stayed home. A few hours later, a mutual acquaintance posted a casual story online. Nothing dramatic. Just a group photo at a bar. And there she was, smiling, relaxed, leaning slightly towards someone I recognized immediately. The same name I'd seen on her phone. The same name she said meant nothing. My chest went cold. Not angry. Not shocked. Just empty. I stared at the screen longer than I want to admit. Zooming in like that would change what I was seeing. The timestamp matched perfectly. The outfit matched what she'd worn earlier. The lie clicked into place so cleanly it hurt. When she came home later, she acted normal. Too normal. She talked about being drained, about needing emotional space, about how hard things had been for her. I watched her talk, listening to words I now knew were practiced. I nodded at the right moments. I even asked if she was okay. That was the worst part, realizing how easy it was for her to accept my concern while lying straight to my face. That night, lying beside her, I felt smaller than I ever had. Not just betrayed, erased. Reduced to a safety net she could step on while reaching for someone else. My chest ached in a way I can't fully explain, like grief mixed with humiliation. I kept thinking, this is what all that loyalty bought me. I didn't cry. I didn't confront her. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, and felt something inside finally break. Not loudly. Quietly. Cleanly. That was my lowest point, realizing I had been loyal to someone who didn't even respect me enough to be honest. Realizing I'd made myself small to keep someone comfortable who had already chosen someone else. And in that silence, something shifted. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't brave yet. But I was done pretending. And for the first time, I started thinking seriously about what it would mean to walk away. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 9 is where I stopped reacting emotionally and started moving quietly, deliberately, like someone waking up from a long fog. After that night, I didn't confront her. I didn't explode. I didn't cry in front of her. I did something colder. I observed. I watched her patterns the way you watch weather before a storm, not to stop it, but to prepare. I began pulling myself inward. I stopped oversharing. Stopped explaining my feelings. When she complained, I listened politely instead of scrambling to fix things. When she asked for reassurance, I gave neutral responses. Yeah, I get it. That sounds stressful. Nothing more. It felt strange, like learning a new language where silence had meaning. Behind the scenes, I started protecting myself. I separated my finances quietly. I checked what was in my name and what wasn't. I stopped covering extra expenses and blamed work or budgeting. She barely questioned it. That part hurt more than I expected, how easily she adjusted as long as her main needs were still met. She noticed the emotional distance before anything else. One night she laughed nervously and said, "You've been acting different lately." I shrugged and said I was just tired. She studied my face like she was trying to read something hidden underneath. For a moment, I thought she might finally ask if I was okay. She didn't. Instead, she started being sweeter. Random affection. Longer hugs. Compliments she hadn't given in months. "You're really good to me," she said one night, almost casually. The words landed wrong. They felt strategic. Like maintenance. I started seeing the pattern clearly now, the push and pull, the affection timed around her needs, the distance whenever accountability came close. The clarity hurt, but it also steadied me. For the first time, I wasn't spiraling. I was planning. At night, I lay awake imagining what leaving would actually look like. The silence afterward. The freedom. The fear. I hated that part of me still wanted her to notice my withdrawal, to panic, to care. But deeper than that was something new, a quiet resolve forming. I didn't know how or when I'd end it yet. I only knew this: I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to chase honesty. And I wasn't going to keep sacrificing myself for someone who treated my loyalty like a resource. The next step would be the hardest one. And once I took it, there would be no pretending left. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 10 is where I finally stopped hiding behind silence and said what I needed to say, not in anger, not in tears, but with a calm that surprised even me. The moment came on an ordinary evening. She was talking about her day, half listening to herself, scrolling on her phone like usual. Something in me just settled. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I told her we needed to talk. She looked annoyed at first, then cautious. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said, "I know you've been lying to me." The room went quiet in that sharp, fragile way where everything feels like it might shatter. She laughed nervously and asked what I meant. I told her I wasn't here to argue, just to be honest. I mentioned the patterns. The disappearing. The stories that didn't line up. The name that kept appearing. I didn't give details, didn't show proof. I didn't need to. Her face changed anyway. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. She denied it at first, of course. Said I was imagining things. Said I was stressed. Said I was projecting again. When that didn't work, she shifted tactics. Her voice softened. Her eyes watered. "I've just been lonely," she said. "You're always tired. You're never really here anymore." Hearing that almost broke me, because part of me wanted to apologize out of habit. But I didn't. I just listened. Then she got defensive. Said I was cold. Said I made her feel unwanted. Said she needed emotional support and didn't know how else to cope. Every sentence subtly placed the blame back on me. And for the first time, I saw it clearly: this wasn't accountability. It was damage control. I told her quietly that I was done pretending everything was fine. That I couldn't keep living in confusion and half-truths. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just said I was stepping back. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. The calm unsettled her more than anger ever could. And in that silence, I felt something shift, not relief yet, not peace, but a strange, steady certainty that this was the point of no return. She didn't beg that night. She didn't apologize either. She just went quiet, watching me like she was recalculating her next move. And somehow, I knew this wasn't over, not even close. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 11 is when the aftermath finally hit, not with closure, but with chaos disguised as remorse. The shift didn't happen immediately. For a day or two, she acted distant, cold, almost offended, like she was waiting for me to apologize. When I didn't, something in her cracked. The messages started slowly. Short check-ins. Are you okay? Then longer ones. You've been really quiet. When I didn't respond right away, the tone changed. She showed up softer, sweeter, suddenly attentive in ways she hadn't been for months. She cooked. She asked about my day. She touched my arm when she spoke. It felt rehearsed, like a version of her pulled from early memories. Then came the apologies, vague at first. I know I haven't been perfect. Then heavier. I didn't mean to hurt you. Then emotional. I'm scared of losing you. She started crying more. Saying she felt lost. Saying she needed me. Saying she finally realized how much I'd done for her. She promised things would change. That she'd be more honest. That she'd try harder. That she just needed time. What messed with my head was how convincing it sounded. Part of me wanted to believe it. Wanted to grab onto the version of her I'd been waiting for all along. But something inside me had gone quiet, the part that used to rush in to save things. Now I just listened. Friends told me she was spiraling. That she seemed panicked. That she kept asking if I'd really leave. Hearing that didn't feel like victory. It felt sad. Heavy. Like watching someone realize too late that the safety net is gone. She started calling late at night, voice shaking, saying things like, "You're really going to give up on us?" I almost caved more than once. My chest would tighten. My hands would shake. But every time, I remembered the nights I'd stared at the ceiling feeling invisible. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain anymore. I just told her I needed space. That I wasn't coming back to how things were. That's when the begging turned desperate and I realized something painful but freeing: she didn't miss me. She missed the stability, the safety, the version of life that stopped working the moment I stopped carrying it. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and part 12 is where everything finally settles, not with revenge or shouting, but with a quiet kind of clarity I didn't know I was allowed to have. After I pulled away, the noise slowly faded. The messages stopped. The late-night calls disappeared. The chaos that had filled my days for so long just went silent. At first, that silence felt terrifying. I'd built my entire sense of purpose around being needed. Without that role, I didn't know who I was. I remember sitting alone in my apartment, the air feeling too still, my thoughts too loud. But slowly, something unexpected happened. I started breathing easier. Sleeping deeper. Thinking more clearly. I noticed how much lighter my body felt without constant anxiety buzzing under my skin. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped bracing myself for emotional emergencies. The peace felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, nothing was being demanded from me. I started rebuilding quietly. I focused on work. I reconnected with people I'd slowly drifted from. I picked up routines that belonged to me, not ones built around someone else's needs. And with distance came perspective. I could finally see how deeply I'd confused love with responsibility, how I'd mistaken endurance for devotion. Every now and then, I'd hear through mutual friends that she still talked about me. That she regretted things. That she didn't realize what she had. Hearing that didn't bring satisfaction, just closure. Because I finally understood something important: real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself to keep someone comfortable. Looking back, I don't hate her. I don't even feel angry anymore. I just see the pattern clearly now: how I was chosen for my stability, not my heart. How my patience made it easy to take from me. How my silence taught her I'd stay. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was the strongest thing I've ever done. I didn't get revenge. I got my life back. And somehow, that feels like the ending I was always meant to reach.